One of the traps I fall into is often being a solution in search of a problem. You've you found something novel. You're like, wow, no one knew that this fits and that this is a solution. Great. Now
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action. Welcome, everybody. I am Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, and today joined by my special guest, Craig Baker. Now, Craig is someone who's a little special because he's a friend. He's been a longtime friend of mine. He's prior military, and when he was in the military, he did something kind of cool that we'll get into later. And he's currently a project manager. He's been one for a little while. So, Craig, why don't you introduce yourself to my audience?
Hey guys, my name's Craig Baker. In my current role, I'm working on some projects and programs for a company called Vine. They provide human performance and coaching to utility workers in the field. We've got some really cool things we're working on as far as software, making it easier for the foreman in the field to brief their crews before they begin work, and kind of bringing some of that real-time data to them so that they can make informed decisions while they're out there. Prior to this, I was working at the Armament Directorate at Eglin, doing weapons acquisitions type work. And before that, I worked at Special Operations Headquarters for Air Force, doing acquisitions work to replace some of the drones with a family of systems called, forgot what it was called now.
It doesn't matter.
Adaptive Airborne Enterprise. And that's what we were working on there. And so I've had a very broad breadth of experience and very goal-oriented person. So that's it.
So, we won't hold it against you that you were in the Air Force.
Yeah.
And we can go ahead and get started because you sent me your bio ahead of time and I've known you for a while. And,
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that I wanted to start with right away, which is you talked a lot about the classic PM dilemma, where you're focusing on details versus driving for the main goal. Can you share a time when getting a single detail actually saved the project because that one thing that you harped on was so critical?
Well, it's I have to talk around it a little bit because, some of these programs are, classified. So I'll kind of, talk about it at a high level, but we were developing a new radio, right, for the military to use. It was supposed to be open source. It was supposed to be, all of the interfaces open so that we don't get back into vendor lock. And
now, when you say, let's clarify for a second, because remember, a lot of the people are in the audience are not military.
Yeah.
When you say open source, that means what?
So historically, some of the big defense contractors would lock down interfaces so that you had to go back to them to get the keys to unlock their magic box. And so a few years back, they decided they no longer wanted to do that because they wanted more power to evolve the system that they purchased or add upgrades or things like that. So there was a hard push to get these interfaces is more open so they could to accomplish the goals that they wanted to accomplish. And so that's what I meant by vendor lock is where you would have to go back to the company. So they've made a lot of progress with buying things more open. So
preventing proprietary software.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the big picture was there that, the military or the DoD didn't necessarily want the proprietary software that was in it. They just wanted the ability to add to it or, connect another device so that they don't have vendor lock issues.
Yeah. So you can work with multiple vendors, multiple products, and they play, I don't want to say they'll play nicely, but they'll play better than they would if they were. Yeah. So continue. I'm sorry.
So, when you're building a new thing that you want it to do all the things, and a lot of times you have, well, we've got the budget for this and we have the requirements for that. And sometimes they didn't necessarily have clear requirements. They just knew that this thing would satisfy a solution. But there was like one specific waveform that the waveform for the radio, basically a signal that it could talk on. that was, broad usage. I mean, it was such a common thing in the military, but the people that I was working with didn't necessarily understand all those nuances because not many of them were actually in the field and understand, what is used and what isn't. And so it was this difficult thing where, I could be the lone voice in the room saying like, "Hey, this is really what we need in this thing. Let's evaluate the cost, see what it's gonna do, see if we can add it in for a reasonable cost." And so this went on for, weeks, and I had to get better at shaping my communication because when I was in the military, you're a decision maker and you get to kind of slap the table and decide which way you want to go. And if you have good communication, then great, but it's not required to get to a yes sometimes when you're a decision maker. But when I was working on this project, I was a support contractor, so I was kind of a guest to the party, to the government. I was a program manager that was doing the same work but no decision making authority. So that was really a time where I realized how awful my communication was and how I presented my ideas. So I kind of started to refine it and pitch it different ways and talk about it different ways, kind of increasing my soft skills for them to understand. And after I felt like I kind of painted the picture enough time and I got some other stakeholders, some subject matter experts to provide their opinions to it, it kind of started to get traction. The understanding that we needed this requirement, that this was going to be key to success of this program, or even, how many other programs wanted to adopt it. And eventually it was interesting. It started coming from top down because some of those user stories or some of the use cases started getting up to leadership, and then the requirement started coming down. So, I mean, that was one of those difficult times where you know something's right, you believe something's right, the requirements need to be in there, and, yelling louder that you need it is not always going to net the best outcome, right? How you talk about something and how you drive an idea into adoption is important. And that's something that I've always struggled with because by nature, I'm a visionary type person. Like I'm a very fast thinker. Strategy just flows out of my brain. And I haven't always been good about getting what's in my head out of my mouth. And it's for for a few years I thought that I really wasn't smart. Like I was like, man, my ideas must be stupid because I am not getting any traction. And the people I'm in the room with, they're 50-pound brains that PhD level stuff, and they just look at me funny. And I don't know when it was, but at some point I realized that they didn't understand what I was talking about. They I didn't build them up to the crux of my idea. The more complicated an idea is, the more difficult it is to get it out of your brain so that other people can see that. And I remember there
let's
was
let's back up there for a second and just establish that most people look at you funny just because that's you.
well, that's fair. Yeah, I'm a weird guy. So
you know,
that's not out of character.
let's not discount that part to start
Yeah.
with.
Um,
So I want to expand on that a little bit. You were talking about that concept of how we all as PMs have these ideas in our head, and we kind of equate it sometimes to what the stakeholders have as good idea fairy.
yes.
And I want to, this is something that I just thought of as you were talking, but as a PM, do you think that sometimes the good idea fairy from the stakeholders or anybody that comes to us could just be a misinterpreted, badly communicated idea rather than a
Yeah.
terrible idea?
Yeah. I've actually been reflecting on this recently. So I've kind of changed roles a little bit, and I'm kind of in a new environment. And when I see issues or things that need to be accomplished, the first thing I do is kind of frame like, what's my timeline? How much time do I have to kind of figure this out so that I can land the plane? And
Nice pun.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I first get my timeline, and then I look at the problem set. And as I'm looking at the problem set, my brain starts building a prototype. Like what could I don't have all of the issues yet. I don't know all the things I need to solve, but let me start firming up, what this is. And the issue that I personally had is when I would ask questions to people, I would start providing solutions. I would just start spitting out solutions to them. And, I got some feedback. I was thankful leadership kind of gave me some feedback and they're like, you're not listening, right? Like you're not listening to the full problem set. And, you're kind of overwhelming people with your ideas. And I meditate on that. I was like, what is my brain doing? Why is this happening to me? It hasn't been a common problem. I'm sorry, it hasn't been a pattern problem because in some teams, it was, well received and we all kind of meshed and all worked. So as I dug deeper, I actually used GPT to kind of help me analyze, and it kicked out something called strategic prototyping.
We'll get to that. We'll get to
Okay, so
that.
you want to hold on to that one?
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
hold on to that one. Well, in corporate lingo, let's put a pin in that.
Okay, we'll circle back, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Uh,
So, but you brought up some interesting points there of, in Six Sigma, I used to be a trainer on that. And one of the things I used to always tell people when I'm teaching them was don't, especially with that methodology, you coming in with this problem solved or with ideas is automatic failure to start, because you need to come in with the idea of here's my problem, here's where I am, where I want to be, go through the whole process, the gap analysis and all that. And then eventually you get to the solution. And as PMs, we've seen this time and time again,
that's
both
right.
as the PM or the SMEs or team members come in. Hey, here's the problem. Here's the project. Oh, already got it solved. Meeting's over. And you're like, you sure about that?
Yeah, going back to your original question, though, was the idea theory. So honestly, I think many people who are visionaries, who are idea fairies, they don't know how to communicate. And so I was one of those people and still have moments where I still am that person because I get so excited to try to solve the problem that your tact or your approach is wrong, your delivery is wrong, and now you've almost burnt people out. Where it's like, oh well, here's another idea fairy. He's got full of ideas. He's going to try to blow our timeline to pieces or screw up all of our requirements or you name it. And so sometimes there's some bias against people with ideas, and so it's tough. It's tough for a visionary type person.
Yeah, I worked with one of them, and they're an interesting breed, I'll say.
Yeah. You and I are almost like on the opposite ends of the spectrum, the way our brains work. But there's a book called Rocket Fuel by Gino Wickman. I haven't actually read it, but I've kind of did a summary and realized that it's a book that I absolutely need to read because it talks about how a visionary type person needs to be paired with an integrator.
Hmm.
And I know the need for that with me because I rarely finish ideas without someone to rein me in. So you keep going, and then you find another idea that's even more exciting, and you switch over to that one, and you just end up hopping ideas without actually doing anything.
Yeah, I'm definitely more of the integrator than I am the visionary.
Correct. Yeah.
And I was actually told that by a visionary,
Yeah.
not you.
Yeah. 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 But a guy like me and you would kind of work well together because you would be able to put up those barriers and go, hey, I know you're onto that right now, and your brain's going, but let's finish this. We have this what we're near to focus on over here. We can brainstorm on that later.
Yeah, when I was working with that visionary, he asked me before he brought me on, you know, give me three reasons why you think this will work, and then he said, give me three reasons why you don't think this will work.
Yeah.
And one of my reasons it wouldn't work was I said, can you take negative feedback from somebody and
Mm,
say that's a dumb idea? Because it's great to have the idea.
yeah.
This is where the genesis of the good idea fairy comes from, is somebody comes up with an idea and it's the idea, but they don't think of the execution and follow through. It's kind of like gold plating or scope creep.
Yeah.
Well, stakeholder A says this will only take your team an extra 2 hours to complete this,
Hmm.
but doesn't realize that stakeholders B, C, and D have downstream effects from that one change that are massively impactful as dependencies. But stakeholder A isn't looking at the rest of the stakeholders' perspectives. He's only looking at his tunnel vision.
Right.
And that's one of those interesting things that you have to bring up sometimes and have those difficult conversations with people is kind of going through the 5 whys sometimes is the most simple way to do it. Why do you think this is a good idea? And you just, sometimes people's brains will just break on the first one.
Yeah, and one of the traps I fall into as well is, there's a dopamine hit from finding the golden goose of ideas, right? Like there is really something that just floods the excitement level. And one of the traps I fall into is often being a solution in search of a problem. You've you found something novel. You're like, wow, no one knew that this fits and that this is a solution. Great. Now I need to find somebody to buy it. Where am I? Like what do I do with this magical thing that no one else knows about, or that you've invented something and you keep chasing that, and you drift. You're drifting away from what you set out to do because you're chasing the solutions based thing. So,
And then on top of that, you can get married to that idea because you're like, oh, this is so amazing. This is such a
yes,
great idea. Why doesn't anybody else see what I see?
that's right.
And then, and I think that is, you know, all of this is literally the genesis of the good idea fairy,
That's right.
because somebody comes up with an idea, they think it's the golden solution, the magic bullet, whatever you want to use, and then they bring it to their team, they bring it to the team, and the team doesn't see the same vision they do.
That's right.
And then they're just like, why don't you see what I see? And sometimes they nobody else sees what you see because you're looking at it with tunnel vision of,
Yes.
only seeing part of the equation, whereas everybody else, especially the PM, their job is to see 360 of everything,
Yeah.
not 1 degree in detail. Like,
Yeah, no, I think that that's key. And one of the things I would say is one of the most important things you can do as a leader of a team is to, understand each individual's contribution to the team. We've both seen throughout our lives times where there is somebody who has something special about them and they are totally discredited. The leader doesn't take the time to figure out where they fit or how to use them best. They just write them off, right? We see that whether you're detail oriented, goal oriented, if you don't fit what that leader's mindset should be for that team member, then they cast them aside. So that's why I think it's also so important for leaders to take inventory of who they have and what those skill sets are, because a lot of times when I have this great idea, I don't even need it to be implemented. Like I just want someone to validate that, wow, that's pretty good. We can't use it right now, but I like that. That may find a use later. Versus, oh, here comes the idea fairy again. It's like, I don't really need you to execute it. Just tell me it's a good idea and tell me what to do with it. So we can also do better on our care and feeding, for visionary type people where it's like, hey, Craig, I know you got another great idea. I think there could be some value there. Let's shelf that. And I've had my best leaders have done that. They've identified that they could rein me in. They could
well,
rein
and
me
that's,
in and put me back on task. And I think that's where the best outcomes come from.
and a lot of that is basic management of meetings as a PM, because I had this conversation numerous times with people of, you've got to know your audience and you've got to know how to control your audience if you're in a project meeting, because if you've got an hour to accomplish something and there's one person, there's Craig over there with his great idea, as a PM, you've got to know how to control that Craig
Yes.
and say, that's a great idea. We'll put that in the parking lot. I'll connect with you offline and we'll talk more about it. And you move on. And that's kind of one way to move on from there. But I also wanted to talk about something else while we're on this topic, because I was I was actually in a job interview, and it was for a company that has a manufacturing facility, and we were talking about ideas. And I said, the person that I look for sometimes in those meetings is the one in the back, kind of a little angry and just quiet the whole time, because odds are that's the person that's been there for the longest amount of time, seen the most things. And then if you pull him aside and you say, hey, why don't you contribute, or why aren't you liking this? He's like, because this is the same idea I heard 5 years ago and 5 years ago before that. And it failed then and it'll fail now. And that's
Mhm.
the opportunity where you say, tell me more. Tell
Right.
me
That's
why.
your knowledge holder.
Exactly. Tell me why it failed both of those times that you saw, because maybe we need to attack this from a different angle.
Hmm.
Maybe maybe this idea is an unsolvable idea based off of what you're telling me.
Hmm.
But those people that are a little, I don't want to use the term disgruntled, but
Yeah,
they're
they're
jaded.
bitter, you know?
They're jaded because they've seen so much and done so much and been through so many different changes. They're just like, all right, I'll just wait this one out. It'll fall on its face and I don't need to worry about it because we'll go back to the way things were in 6 months. Those are the people you sometimes want to go grab, put your arm around them and use that emotional intelligence that you were talking about to kind of go, tell me, why did it not work? What didn't, you've been here forever. What didn't you like about that idea to be able to make it work?
No, that's a good point. And you know what? The more experience you get, you realize that the right answer is usually in somebody's brain in that room already,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
And it's not yours
it
as the
is not
PM.
yours, and you can usually, I mean, if you encourage that team environment, that is more important than the golden goose of ideas. People have to feel comfortable to share, just like your guy that's in the corner of the room. He needs to feel valued because what happens is on some of these teams like you're describing, there's not a lot of innovation. It's really kind of shrank and people are in these routines and they're not really thinking outside the box. They're just like, all right, well, it doesn't matter if I share anyway, because they're not going to execute it. And then some leader will come in, have some great idea, and they will just force that down everyone's throat
Mm.
instead of actually letting the team come up with that idea. And even if you have to lead them to that, like asking the right questions to make it their idea, there is nothing more important than a team coming up with a solution together where everybody owns a piece of that and everybody comes together. And honestly, it takes a special human to kind of corral that and encourage that environment.
Yeah, and when you start talking about ideas and stuff, one of the things I've always said is I don't care if I come up with the idea and then somebody else takes the credit for it because I've seen that happen so many times in meetings where I'm like one of my the designs, the blue thing sitting behind me is a perfect example of that. I was in a meeting, we were trying to solve a problem. I made the suggestion. Half the room said, "Trevor, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Why would we create that?" Somebody else 3D printed it, prototyped it, brought it to our lab to test it out,
Hmm.
and everyone was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing! How did you come up with this?" He's like, "It was Trevor's idea. He said it in a meeting."
Yeah,
But it was just, I don't know if it was my delivery. I don't know if they just weren't ready for it. If they needed a visual cue, but but my point in all of that was it wasn't about me coming up with the idea to solve the problem. It was that the problem was solved.
correct.
Because as a project manager, I don't think that's our egos need to be smaller than
Correct.
everyone else's because we're the subject matter experts in project management. That's it. The people around us are the true drivers of the mission, so to speak, because they're the ones I go to ask, "Hey, tell me about this in in the IT circle," and then they'll rattle off a bunch of things. I'll be like, all right, pretend like I'm your 5-year-old kid, and then explain it to me."
Yeah.
And then you watch them just go, I I I can't.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding.
So with that, now you've talked about you mentioned strategic prototyping
Mhm.
earlier. Let's talk about that a little bit more. And how is that different from brainstorming?
So I, I think about brainstorming, the traditional sense, you're writing a paper and you're just throwing out words, right, or ideas. It's not as organized, right? I think brainstorming maybe comes before strategic prototyping. And so I was also doing some research and it's a part of like design theory. Some of your listeners may, know all about that because this term was new to me. But once I discovered it, I realized like my brain is in that mode all the time. Now, there are times where I snap out of it, right? Like it's not when I see a problem set and I say, we need a solution and it's a complex solution and we need it tomorrow. My brain goes full blast on that and it really starts just trying to shape that up. But where I fall into a trap is I don't listen. I'm dragging the problem out of the person, which is pretty rude. It's pretty rude.
What? What was that?
Dragging the problem out. Yeah. And, it works for me, but, when I solve my problems at home, that's the first thing I go to because I don't have to worry about offending someone else. I'm like, I go straight into strategic prototyping. And so let me, I guess, elaborate on that. First, I look at the problem set. What problem am I trying to solve? What is it? And then my mind just starts coming up with possible solutions. But I always start with the exquisite solution. Like, what is the most premium thing that I could have? And I see where that lands. I see how it solves the problem. And
Your ideal future state.
correct, my ideal future state is where I look at that. And then I look at the cost associated, do that cost benefit analysis. And if it maybe it solves three out of five of my problems, but not the other two, then I go, well, it's a balance. In my brain, this is happening in real time. It's very instinctual. It's not, I probably couldn't write it down on paper very clearly, but this is all happening very rapidly in my brain. And when I encounter people I need data from, like I need to know the full problem set, they'll give me a little piece and I'll adjust my prototype and throw it back out to them. This is extremely frustrating for people who are not in this mode and understand what I'm doing. You overwhelm people. And so now knowing that, I'm able to kind of, I guess, know when I'm in this mode and know when I need to kind of get out of that mode and be more tactful and strategic and considerate to others.
That sounds a lot like we had a previous guest talk about the OODA loop. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with that?
Orient, yeah.
It's like orient, or observe, orient, design, analyze,
Is it decide,
decide.
assess, something like that?
Well, that or the PDCA,
Hmm.
plan, develop, check, analyze. You know, there's all kinds of, it sounds like it's another name for something that everyone else uses.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the process that works for you.
And it's just overt, or it's my brain's been doing it so long with just myself and my own solutions around the house, my problem set, that I'm very proficient at it. And I'm very fast at it. And I can really churn through some stuff. And I've been in some rooms before where everybody in there was in that same thing. So no one discouraged it then because we were all doing it. We were all kind of coming up and brainstorming the ideas and everything laid flat. But sometimes I was on a new team and I went back into that mode and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, dude, just slow down. Like what are we talking about?"
Well, and that kind of goes into that whole basic concept of know your audience. I distinctly remember when I was mentoring some PMs and they were new PMs and they were talking to me about how do you keep your meetings on track so well? And I said, I've observed some of the key people in the meetings so much. I know I know what makes them tick in a way so that, for example, when you get into those crazy strategic prototyping modes where you're going left and right, I'd be like, all right, hey, Craig, let's set up a meeting later. I want to hear
Yeah,
all about it,
that's right.
but we need to get this done
Right.
now. And you can brain dump on me later. And that would satiate you to be
That's
like,
right.
all right, but, that's a skill that goes into a combination of those emotional intelligence, the reading the room, the controlling a meeting, all those things that PMs don't learn in the PMBOK.
Yeah, and there's one interesting thing when I realize I don't turn it on is when I'm responsible for the outcome, right? Like if I've been designated as the person, I don't feel frantic because at the end of the day, I guess what I'm saying is I'm more patient when
Because
I'm
you're
in
accountable.
because I'm accountable and I'm actually better at letting things play out and doing some of this brainstorming. When I'm at my worst in this mode, is I put myself in the shoes of the person who is in charge and I feel like they're not going to hit the mark or like, wow, this on the current trajectory, we are 3 months late and three times over budget. And so I feel frantic to try to help and provide this thing. And so the self-awareness of doing that is what's huge because there are times where I haven't been self-aware that I was doing it. I was just being helpful and I really wasn't
It
being helpful.
it almost sounds like it's the difference between responsible and accountable on a RACI. Because the accountable person means it's got to be done. The responsible person is the one that does the work.
Correct.
So it's almost your brain has to remember which part of the metaphorical RACI you've got your name under
Yeah.
to know which portion of your brain needs to be working.
Yeah, and there's some negative carryover too from like the military. Your missions are, no fail missions. Like you can't. So if you see something, you got to push kind of hard and turning that off in the civilian
Hmm.
world where you're like, you know what, no one's gonna die if we don't hit this mark. Like, I mean, it's not ideal,
Yeah,
but I don't have to
it
run over this guy or gal to make my point. And so
that goes back to something I've said for a long time, and that's that nothing in this world can't wait 24 hours in the civilian world. And
correct.
I caveat that with, yes, I know there might be downstream effects, there might be cost associated, there might be a lot of downstream effects, but we're not talking about, for the most part, things that can't be fixed later if something gets delayed 12 hours or 2 hours.
That's right. And there is some negative in making it too long, but to your point, like 24 hours is a good sleep on it. Let it come to you a couple days later. I think the issue is I think when you kick it out, you're like, "Oh, we'll solve that later." But you don't actually set a time to finish it because there's something to be said for finishing a task to completion that's ready to be complete and getting it off your plate so it's not a distraction for the big brain problems.
So let's kind of change topics here to something a little bit different. You know, you're you're working on something pretty big, aren't you? That is supposed to help revolutionize job briefings.
That's right. Yeah, Icon from Knowledge Vine.
Yeah, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I've been coaching in the field, human performance to the utility workers for the last year, and what our company's come up with is a software suite that allows them to use natural language when they brief their crews on what they're going to do. So before utility workers go and set a utility pole, they've got to put pen to paper or type up a pre-job briefing to discuss the hazards, the instructions, the considerations, the emergency contact, the nearest hospital, all of those things, the current weather for the day, all of the roles that are designated.
You
There
mean
is,
a you mean a task, conditions, and standards?
yeah, that could work.
That's an army term.
Yeah, yeah, or a pre-mission brief, right, for the
Exactly.
other guys. But yeah, it's a pre-mission brief, and so there's varying degrees of quality, and
Is that
no
something
one
that
is out
they're
there necessarily, I guess, helping them out. There's no accountability sometimes. And so, or there's little accountability. Some of them are just pen to paper. And so if management doesn't come out or safety doesn't come out to see the quality, then who knows what they briefed. I mean, they could even write "be safe today" on their job briefing. And that's really inadequate for what these guys can experience. And so with Icon, it leverages large language model and algorithms to kind of assist the leader as they go through this pre-job brief, gives them additional things that they didn't consider and to discuss. And then at the end, it gives them kind of a rating for like how good their briefing was. How detailed was it? Did they talk about all of the steps that were involved with the, the job they were about to do? And it pulls the weather and it pulls the nearest hospital and all of those things. So the value to this is one, that the leader gets better. He gets real-time feedback that he maybe is giving a bit of vague guidance to his crews. And then at the higher management leadership level, they're actually going to see some of that data as well, as far as how detailed that foreman for that job gives a briefing. And so it does a few things. It helps the individual more effectively communicate to the crew, and it captures how effective that communication is for leadership. It paints a better picture. You can see exactly what these foremen are briefing to their crews in the field. Then the leaders at the home office can also make strategic risk adjustments. If they hear something in the field that maybe the crews weren't expecting, and maybe they need to roll another, utility truck down there to support them, they know that in real time. Like, oh, wow, we've got an extra risk over here because of this job was bigger than anticipated. Let's send another team over there to assist them. That's never been able to do like strategic risk um, in real time for these kind of workers. So it's really going to revolutionize how these guys conduct their briefings and potentially reduce accidents.
So when you're talking about this as an AI driven tool, is it a standard format for every briefing, or is it something that changes based off of the size and scope of the assignment.
Yeah. So there's in the utility field, there's different types of utility work. You have street light repair, you have underground utilities, you have overhead, and then some teams do, a few of each, or they do more than one on one job. Like maybe an overhead crew is also doing some underground, and it does adapt to the type of work they're doing and the considerations that they need to have. Like they call it the minimum approach distance. If you have, a certain kilovolt on that primary line, or that energy, the cable, the wire, then certain hazard with approaching energized lines. So depending on what these guys, experience, sometimes the overhead guys are also doing the underground utilities. And so this software can actually give them a custom template for the things that they need to cover, and pull real-time data. It's also able to pull multiple people's rule books or work practices. For example, one crew may be working for a customer, like a subcontractor. So the subcontractor would actually have rules they need to follow from their company, and they would have rules they need to follow from the customer's company. And it's very hard to navigate what are the standards and expectations, right? How close can we get to that energized line for our company? Is it more restrictive than the customer's company? And sometimes it just ends up being some vague guidance and some confusion. And our software is able to really kind of give them the most restrictive from both, so that they're in compliance with multiple uh, guidances.
So now's the time where we get into the fun part of the
All
interview,
right.
because I hand selected some guest questions just for you.
Oh, excellent.
Now, when you were a drone pilot, you know, as a drone pilot, you're still considered technically a pilot, which means I'm assuming you got a call
What do you mean
sign.
technically a pilot? Actually a pilot.
Hey, does that mean I'm a pilot because I'm a drone pilot too?
Hey, I say if you have a joystick and a throttle control, then you're a pilot.
So, did you have a cool nickname, cool call sign like Maverick or Iceman, or was it more like Steve from IT?
No, no, actually, so I did have a call sign. I don't really use it anymore. Some guys, bring it into their civilian life, but my call sign was Rain Man. Okay. And,
I can see why.
well, it probably fits because I'm a little quirky, but it was all capital letters. If you ever see a call sign that is all capital letters, it's an acronym. Okay. And so each letter stands for something. And one of my fellow pilots came up for this on a call sign drop night, and it was kind of clever. So most of these call signs are also either a mistake or a play on your name, right? Someone that has, you know, the last name Khan, then their call sign could be Genghis. And sometimes it's an acronym, it means something, and sometimes it just goes. But most call signs, I would say, are a result of a screw up, something that you did not do right. And now you carry that as a badge of honor, your screw up.
Yep.
So mine was a result of a mistake. And this was like, I guess, during the ISIS fight, where it was just chaos, Wild West. And I was flying an MQ-1 at the time. And one of the other assets that were overhead. So it was me and another asset that was overhead, or at least my drone was overhead and his drone was overhead. And he struck the ISIS fighters, and they started to get away. And I asked the JTAC, which is the guy that controls fires. I said, "Hey, do you want me to, strike these guys before they get away?" And he said, "Yeah, let's do this." And so I, did my proper call. I called in. You basically call in and turn it on the target. And you're supposed to, it's a sequence of events. Is you're supposed to call in with your direction. So I said in from the north, and then they respond back with cleared hot. And so I was under time pressure, a lot of things going on, a lot of chaos, a lot of distractions. And I called in, but he didn't hear me. He didn't actually hear my in call. And then I started getting tunnel vision on these guys that were, about to get away. And so I just rifled it. I called in, rifled it, missiles in flight, and I I basically someone came over my headset because they were observing, and they were like, "Hey, you clearance. You forgot your clearance." And I said to the JTAC, I said, "Hey, I just rifled." He goes, "Without clearance?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Off try." So we, basically threw the missile into the dirt. And well, anyway, the call sign is the R is rifle, and it was like rifle after in man. So there's a key element of clearance that's supposed to come after in. So I did rifle after I called in without waiting for clearance. It was rifle after in man. So
Not as cool as I thought it would be.
no, no, no. It's,
But hey, at least it's a cool story. There's some where it could have been something about, oh, I tripped over the crack during formation and everything, and everybody laughed at me and I messed up the formation.
yep, 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 exactly. So that's a tough thing to do too, man. When you rifle without clearance, that's one of the big no-nos, right? Like that's kind of a big deal that you do that. It's almost like you wear a scarlet letter after you've made that mistake, but it can happen.
Well,
I mean, with the
but we can take that into a lessons learned that,
correct.
you know, you I I'm willing to bet money you never made that mistake again after that.
No, I mean, that's it. You had to kind of make some deliberate changes to your process to make sure
Hmm.
that it did never happen again. Having specific self checks that you do to mitigate that and control, because you're only as good as you are on your worst day, right? Like there were
Well,
times there were times where you would have 6, 8 months, 10, 12 months of good days, and you think that like you're on the top. When I did that, I was highly experienced at that point. Like I shouldn't have made that mistake. But you build this overconfidence. That's one of the human performance traps we teach as well, which is overconfidence. What happens when you are overconfident? You stop doing things deliberately. Like you're just
well
flying
that
by the
goes
seat of your pants and it's always working out. But when the right environment comes around and you fail, that's how good you are. That's why you see these guys that, train for high risk things. They do it with a lot of distractions because they know they're only as good as on their worst day. But all of that stuff translates to things we do in our life.
Well, I mean, Michael Phelps is famous for saying his coach literal deliberately would mess with him at major events so that when he got to the Olympics, okay, his goggles went down. He had experienced it,
Yeah.
and I use that kind of to go into the whole idea of, well, you're talking about something in combat as high level stress like we talked about, but that happens every day in projects too with PMs that going right back to the beginning of I have an idea, I'm fixated on that idea, and I forget about everything else that could be impacting that my idea is not the best to solve this problem.
Right. I we were under extreme time pressure a lot of times in the military, but to your point, there's such thing as artificial time pressure where what I experienced in that environment was the exact same thing that a project manager experienced because he artificially pushed up his pressure, his time pressure
Mhm.
to that level. That's what some people don't understand. And so that's what I also try to, coach while I'm in the field is for human performance. Those environments where we were under extreme time pressure, if you let it push you, you're going to be under those same time pressure and you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, just because, my statement about everything can wait 24 hours came from the concept of, yeah, I don't talk about my military experience a lot, but, I've been deployed. I've been in situations and, we joke about, well, I was there when seconds counted. Well, seconds count, but they can be metaphorical seconds too that, not everybody experiences the same level of stress and not everybody deals with stress the same way. And just because you've never been in a firefight or bullets flying or any of that doesn't mean you don't know what it's like to be stressed out. It just means you're dealing with a different stress. And a lot of people artificially stress themselves out. I'm guilty of this 1000% about things. And just yesterday, I had a friend call me and tell me, does this matter? And I was like, well, hear me out. This is what's going on. He's like, Trevor, does this matter?
Mm,
What happens if you let it go? Don't fight it. Just let it go. And what happens if this happens? Then I'll start over doing this. He's like, okay. And what's the worst case scenario of that happening?
mhm.
I don't start at the experience level that I had before and all this. He's like, okay, can you get there yourself? well, yeah. He's like, all right, then
There you go.
why are we worried about this? And I was like, you know what? You're right. This was stressing me out for what gain when if I put a little bit of work in over here, wait probably 2 months, I'll be right back where I was. And I'm not stressing about this. I'm focused on that.
Going through that process that you just went through is important because you're not going to make your best decisions when you're that stressed out, right? And I'm bad about artificially stressing myself out. We learned something, at a class one time, like a resiliency class of how to deal with stress and everything. And I still use this today, but it's similar to what you're talking about. But like, let's say I'm late for work, right? Like I'm supposed to be at work, I overslept. Like that to me is a crisis. Well, you can get in that downward spiral where you're like,
Yep.
I'm going to show up
Yep.
late, and then you know what? I got in trouble last week, so they're probably going to fire me. And then after they fire me, I won't be able to feed my family. And then before you know it, my whole family's homeless in the
And your
streets.
wife's on the corner.
And then you're going into work like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna be homeless tomorrow." And it's not rational. That's the bottom line is it's not rational, but your brain took you there. But they gave us this little tool or this little trick, and I really, like I said, I use it. You think about that scenario. Like let your brain go down. Okay, I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
be homeless tomorrow. And then they said, go to the best case scenario. Oh, they don't even know I'm late. Like there was a fire drill or whatever, like just not even a thing. And then choose something in the middle, which is like, all right, well, they'll probably give me some feedback and say, hey, Craig, you were late. Don't do that anymore. And you say, all right, I won't do it anymore. You apply the feedback. I kid almost every time it's always in the middle. But I'm
Yep.
able when I go
I
through those steps, like you were talking about, you go through those steps, this is fine. I can accept this outcome. I'm gonna be better tomorrow. I'm gonna take my, punishment or my feedback session and tomorrow's gonna be better.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place for us to end. So, is there anything that you'd like to plug or put out to the audience?
No, I think that's it for me. I really just appreciate you, bringing me on and let me yammer on a little bit. And I was excited to be on this podcast with you and excited to continue seeing your upward trajectory with the popularity of the podcast. And I'm honored. Thank you, buddy.
And I'll put a link to Craig's LinkedIn on the show notes. So if you want to connect with him, feel free. So like and subscribe to the show pages, YouTube. I'm trying to get that going more and I'm trying to grow the YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all major podcast platforms. So may all your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Craig Baker, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM.
Thanks, guys.